Hello, Kristen.
From Josh about how.
Hello.
Hi, Commissioner McFadden and Chief Davis.
Good afternoon.
Right. Good afternoon. So I have terrible reception at the moment, so I won't be on the camera because I have to conserve my bandwidth. Otherwise, I will not be able to do anything. Let's see. Welcome, everybody. We'll give folks a few more minutes to get into the room. Folks, a few more moments. Christian, did you make it home?
Not yet. I'm just on my phone at the moment.
Oh my gosh. Drive safely.
Thanks.
Hey, Chief Steven, I see you there as well. Hello, hello.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I feel like we're long overdue, so I'm going to message you so we can find some time.
Sounds great. I look forward to it.
Awesome.
Chief Ham is on as well. Good afternoon, Chief Ham.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hey, Chief Ham. Nice to have you here. Thank you.
Glad to be here. Just left one meeting and had one with Mr. Davis this morning, so I'm glad to be here.
They always have you running. I know it. All right. So do we have our presenters present, Christian? Can we ready to go? Actually, I shouldn't ask you, Christian. Are our presenters here today?
We are.
Awesome. Awesome. So thank you, everybody, for joining today's policy committee meeting. At 3:32, I sort of convened this meeting. Today, we'll be talking about policy ECAE, school police and general order review. We do not have any public comments signed up. And so I will pass it over to our presenters. We'll have about 20 minutes for this presentation so that we can have robust time for discussion. And if we need a little bit more time because y'all are only ones on the agenda, we could probably squeeze it to 30 minutes, but I try to keep it to 20 if possible. With that,
Mr. Brooks.
Yes.
Sorry, this is Christian. We actually had 2 people sign up for public comment.
Oh, sweet. It's not on the list. Okay, so who are? Let me just make a note so I don't forget. Then
It's on the name. I'm not in front of it. Their names are on the PDF agenda.
Oh, okay. So I'm looking at the one that's in. Let me see. Oh, I see. Okay, great. So is it Priya?
Yep.
And Esther Joy. Sweet. And I believe was this for our conversation about the student advocacy group? Did they ever get to the agenda, Christian?
This goodness, we were in contact, but I don't think we finalized them getting on the agenda, so I'll follow up. I believe there was a question about what they want to do, so yes.
Awesome, thank you. So Priya and Esther Joy, I will come to you all later after public comment when we're at that time. So thank you all for joining. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to our presenters.
Chief Davis, you want to kick us off?
Sure, absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. Chief Sivan and myself, along with Chief Ham, have done a lot of work around school police updates, and in this particular case, the general order review. So I'd like to kick it off, if I could, with just some framing that if folks were at the operations committee, they're going to see some of the same things, but we've tried to be very aligned with our work and with our messaging. And so we're going to start with the mission of the Baltimore City School Police Force, and you can see it there. What I'm going to point out is just the mission around safe learning environments, positive relationships and high quality professional police services. And if we go to the next slide, the question is, how do we get there, and how does the school police force really work towards that mission, towards that vision, if you will? And it's really around three different things. It's around reinforcing training in the belief that the vast majority of situations in schools can be resolved through de-escalation, some self-de-escalation, and a restorative mindset. It's also done by making sure that school administrators handle the vast majority of situations, and that there's a lot of positive events and relationship building that happens not just in schools, but also in the school community. Let's keep going. That work has resulted in the past, when you really look at this, over a decade worth of school arrest data. And you can see that as of about 6-7 years ago, there was a steep decline. And that really coincides with a lot of the work that Chief Ham has done with his team to make sure that that mindset, to make sure that the training, to make sure things like de-escalation have been put first and foremost, and not just an afterthought. And so in the end, right, we went from a place where we were arresting, you know, in 1011 it says about 500, but I think even before that it was closer to 700 or 800, down to usually around 50 or so less. And again, that goes back to the previous slides in the three main areas of emphasis. If you put it in perspective and compare us with other Maryland jurisdictions, excuse me, you can see that a lot of other districts arrest students through their school police at a much, much higher rate. We go back to 1920 here because last year was virtual and there really weren't a lot of arrests across Maryland because of the virtual situation. So if you look at 1920, and that year we had 19 arrests, and you can compare us to everyone else. And again, I put that as an area of emphasis, never to say that we don't have more work to do, but to say that this has been a decade-long work that really has resulted in our current situation where we work to make sure students are handled by school administrators. And if it is somewhat serious, then we get into diversion programs more so than arrests. And again, that's what you see right here, right? To date, there's been a little bit more than 5,000 suspensions. Again, school administrators handle those. And then there's been about almost 190 diversions. And when you get to the rest, there's been about 31. There's been about 15 situations where pepper spray had to be used, and we haven't had a civilian review board complaint since 2016. All of that framing, right, is just so that folks know what we're at or what we're pushing for from a larger organization. But I know Chief Sivan is going to talk a lot more on the general orders.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chief Davis. Chief Ham, would you like to just add a few words in terms of framing to Chief Davis before we go into the details of the policy, the regulation, and the general order?
Thank you, Josh. And what I would say is that we have made it our top priority to make sure we do what's best for kids and families. And so that's the mindset that I'm trying to make my team understand, that, you know, if it's something serious, we'll deal with it. If it's something minor, we can deal with it with the code of conduct. It's that simple. And we have to foster and build quality connected relationships with these children so that we can get the intel that we need. And actually, while we were on the phone, the command officer of the Central District called me, and I switched over because I didn't know what he wanted. But it was about intelligence, because our children, if we build that trust, they're going to tell us what's going on and let us know. And that's why he called me. So it's all about relationships.
Thanks, Chief Ham, and thanks, Chief Davis. So with that frame, and I think that frame is important, my job is to go into some of the details of the work we're doing in terms of review of the police policy, the police regulation, and then the general orders. And I think the other important context to give is that in 2018, the board and the district went through a comprehensive review of all of this with the Maryland Center for School Safety as a consultant or consultation. There was a lot of engagement from stakeholders, and we really anticipated many of the legal, legislative, and policy developments since, both statewide and nationwide. And so the current review is really more targeted, and what we're doing is focusing on recent state legislation, including the Maryland Police Accountability Act, which we'll get to, recent board policy revisions. You'll see a number of those policies have been revised since 2018, so we wanted to make sure that the general orders have been aligned. There have also been revisions to the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding that the school police have with the city police department, so aligning those, as well as current school police programs and policies. And the Baltimore City Police Department has undergone a lot of work as a result of the DOJ consent decree. So we want to benefit from that work and best practices. And then finally, we are already engaged with a variety of stakeholders and want to make sure that we benefit from feedback in this process. So I'm going to go through quickly, but there are a lot of documents with revisions in board docs and available to the public that show the details of this. And obviously we can go into all these details, but I think the point here is an overview, and I'm going to drive pretty fast through this, but Chief Ham, please, if I forget something, chime in. So state legislation, just an overview. The Maryland Police Accountability Act was passed in 2021 and had a series of parts to it. And then there was a Child Interrogation Protection Act. We'll get into those in more detail. And we actually also include links to all these in case the watching public wants to look in more depth. This is also an overview of the MOU. The last updates were executed in 2020, which clarified jurisdiction, also emphasized the theme that both Chief Ham and Chief Davis emphasized, that the vast majority of student conduct is best addressed by educators and school system personnel, and we should be affording students opportunity to learn from their mistakes. Then also clarified practices around questioning and arresting students on school property. So overall, on the board policy ECAE and the administrative regulation, what we propose, and you can see these in detail in the red line, are technical revisions to update to state law, some cross-references, codification of the current school police approach to diversion, and we'll get to that below. And then also some language that we included when the student discipline policies were updated. That's JKARA, and I see that Lori Hines is joining us, who's our expert on student code of conduct. But just we put in language based on feedback there to say that city schools would establish clear expectations for the roles of school police and other law enforcement on school property while avoiding unnecessary arrests and referrals that have unintended negative collateral consequences and disparate impact for students of color and students with disability. Both chiefs referenced this, and I think that you'll see that throughout the policies, regulations, and general orders. So really the meat of our work so far has been to focus on the general orders. So the general orders govern school police's day-to-day contact and conduct. And our regulation requires that the general orders themselves be approved by the board on a biannual basis and that feedback be accepted for 30 days prior to release. There are about 69 of them, I think I counted right. And so we've prioritized review of about 18, open to looking at more, but that was a lot of work already, and we're looking forward to additional feedback. You can find all of them on the school police's website. We group them in clumps. The first one has to do with personnel processes, and these are the general orders. There's a part at the bottom about our nepotism law that just aligns with, the nepotism general order that aligns with board policy that was recently revised. But focusing on the top group, that's where we're making changes to make sure we align with the path-breaking Maryland Police Accountability Act of 2021, and then the recent amendments in 2022. And just to say an overview of that, they repealed the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, which was enacted back in 1974, and established new requirements for investigations of citizen complaints, and then review of those complaints by an administrative charging committee, a trial board process, a uniform disciplinary matrix that will be established by the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission, as well as procedures for suspension and termination, requirements for a victim's rights advocate, as well as a database to track complaints, and the disclosure of records of school police regarding job-related misconduct. So those are the big pieces of that new state legislation that we're weaving into those 1, 2, 3, 4 general orders to address those points. The second bucket is around equal opportunity and anti-discrimination. There are about 5 general orders here that we want to align with recent revisions to. There's a bunch of board policies listed here, which are really our core anti-discrimination, equity, and harassment and sexual harassment provisions, as well as our provisions. The board has done a lot of work around supporting LGBTQ students and employees, and so those are reflected in updates to one of the general orders. There too, we really aligned with and benefited from the work that the Baltimore Police Department has done, particularly around bias incidents, bias-based profiling, and the interactions general order, and plagiarized, copied. I think plagiarism is a form of flattery here, but copied over are really good provisions there. The third chunk go around police investigative procedures. And so there are a bunch of general orders that we addressed here. The first are 2 that deal with interviews and interrogations. And I think that one of the overviews that I should say here that's important to emphasize, and Chief Ham would want me to emphasize, we've made a lot of tweaks to align with state law, recognizing that the school police themselves often engage in limited conduct that's addressed, but we still need an order to address that. So even though we have very limited interrogations, usually if serious enough, as the chief mentioned, for it to be an interrogation, a student will be turned over by the school police to the Baltimore City Police. Still, we need to have a general order that reflects that. So we're combining these 2 into one, and we're aligning with the Child Interrogation Protection Act. What's that mouthful of legislation? Well, that's a really important act that passed this legislative session, which prohibits law enforcement officers from conducting interrogations, custodial interrogations of a child, until first the child has consulted with an attorney, and second, the law enforcement officer has made an effort to give actual notice to the child's parent or guardian. We've reflected those. On the second point, there was already substantial work done in the general order as it existed, but we worked in both to make sure that that's part of the general orders if and when that happens. The next area is search and seizure warrants. School police rarely, if ever, execute search and seizure warrants, and Chief Ham couldn't remember any no-knock warrants executed, but the state law that recently passed limited use of no-knock warrants and put additional procedures in place for search warrants. So we've added those in. We've also clarified that a search by the school police has a different standard than a school administrative search, meaning a search by a principal. So we really clarified the distinction between those. And then at the bottom of this slide, you'll see traffic control. There are new provisions of state law around stops and requiring officers to clarify and have a badge visible. Again, limited involvement by our school police in those, but we need to have it as part of our general orders. So next section is on use of force. We have a general order on use of force. There is a portion of the Maryland Police Accountability Act that sets a standard for use of force. The standard is necessary and proportional. That's been clarified in an opinion of the Maryland Attorney General. And importantly, the legislature really signaled that it wanted to incorporate a lot of really good work that the Baltimore City Police Department did with support from the DOJ consent decree. So we've aligned and really clarified necessary and proportional. But again, to clarify, and back to the framing slides that Chief Ham and Chief Davis went over, there are very limited use of force by our school police, but we still need this there. And then at the bottom of the slide, we've also tweaked the general order on jurisdiction to make sure it aligns with our MOU. Pretty much did, but there were a couple of tweaks there. Okay, the next section on the next slide is on technology that our school police use. So we've retitled this because as the Chief Ham mentioned at the Operations Committee this morning, there's a requirement that all law enforcement in the state have body-worn cameras. That'll go into effect in July 2025. And so we're starting to lay out provisions because we're working with the Baltimore Police Department on a pilot for next year, a limited pilot, as well as we are collaborating with the Baltimore Police Department on a license plate reader program and want to make sure that it's reflected in our general orders, which guide the conduct of our officers. It also talks about training that will be important there as well. And then the final piece is our general order on diversion strategies. Here, we really benefited from feedback already from community stakeholders, and we look forward to more. I think some of them are testifying in public comment today, so look forward to that. But we want to align this general order with our student code of conduct and with recent updates to our disciplinary policies, and really with the practice that Chief Ham has pioneered. So we're codifying the approach that Chief Ham and his team are taking. Here is a list that's in the general order, and the general order, as clarified, really divides into referable offenses that automatically go to diversion as opposed to arrest. That may be considered for diversion in consultation with the school police, and that go and really are dealt with entirely by the code of conduct. So you can see this list. We've got some input in this list, but continue to revise it and look forward to input and feedback. Then also this clarifies protocols, that there's a diversion assessor who is a city school staff member in the chief of school, designated by the chief of schools, who will look at the incident, including the circumstances like the student's age, grade, and developmental level, in determining the appropriate response. Also, an important point is that if the initial diversion program is not completed, we're not going to right away refer to the police and arrest, but rather look to the appropriateness of another diversion or intervention. And then also we're adding data collection and reporting requirements into the general order, as well as a review of aggregate data with key stakeholders at least quarterly. So that's a big feature. Looking forward to additional feedback on that one. Timeline here. Of course, we're going into a new fiscal year and board year, so the calendar's not set. And Christian would remind me to say this, but tentatively, we want to bring this for first reader in August and second reader in September, which really we hope that that gives ample time for feedback and engagement in this process and review of what's really a lot of documents here. We have a stakeholder engagement plan, which is pretty extensive. We've already had a listening session with PCAB and Youth as Resources. We are going to look to our school police student advisory team, which I'll talk about in a second, for feedback as well. We're going to consult and already have started consulting with various advocate groups, criminal justice advocate groups, which has been facilitated very helpfully by the Open Society Foundation. Also consultation with the Fraternal Order of Police, the Baltimore City Police Department, and the Maryland Center for School Safety, which helped us a lot last time. We're going to ask for information sessions with PCAB and SCBC and CCAC and other groups that we do, as well as written feedback from a broad array of groups, which we'll go into next. We're going to look to the school police student advisory team. There was a hiatus of this group during COVID, but there's extensive work in collaboration with ASCBC to revive it. And we will begin meeting towards the end of this school year and looking to this group, not just for feedback on the policy and regulation and general orders, but also more broadly to support the police in building communication and trust. Chief Ham, would you like to say anything about the student advisory team before I move on?
Yes, sir. And to your point, we really care about student voice. So whenever we can get this program restarted, I would be excited about it. And I've been doing work in the community, particularly in West Baltimore, talking to young people about the work that we do. So I'm excited about it.
Excellent. And so I think the final slide just shows some of the groups that we're going to reach out here to, and obviously other ideas are welcome. And this is the group that we're working list. I think that about wraps us up. Hopefully not too much over the time that Commissioner Brooks set for us.
Yeah, no, Josh, you were just at that 32-minute mark. I'm sorry, 22-minute mark, 22 minutes. So great job. Y'all have this down to a science. So thank you all so much for the presentation. And I'm going to open it up for our board commissioners to see if you have any questions or general thoughts and reflections since we're in that space.
Thank you. And thanks for the presentation. To everyone who's put work into this. I would be interested in, we have a couple of partners, Safe Streets and Baltimore Ceasefire. I know that Erica has been a great partner and resource to city schools. I'm curious if it would be wise to bring those groups in for feedback as well, to solicit them and to just strengthen the partnership that city schools has with them, with the amount of work that they do in our communities.
Great idea. Chief Ham, what do you think?
I strongly agree. And what I would say is that the work that we've been doing in Sandtown, we have had Safe Street be a part of it, along with Faith Base. So my arms are open. Whatever help I can get, I'll use.
Great, thank you.
Great, I appreciate that. And for me, this, I mean, it's coming to us right now, you know, as it does before it goes to first reader. So I'm really curious to hear more of the feedback from the stakeholders as it relates to some of the revisions that are in place. Can you all also help me? It's been a few years, but we have school police officers in select secondary schools. Why not all of our secondary schools?
Chief, you want to take that one?
Yes. What I would say, Commissioner, is this, and this is prior to you all coming. They cut my department in half. So we don't have that many officers to be able to be in all the schools because of budgetary constraints that they had. So what we tried to do essentially and subsequently is, and we recently did this, we were having some trouble in some of our high schools. And so we had some people that were assigned to middle schools that we had to reassign to high schools. And that's probably why on the school police report card, it doesn't reflect as good on the relationship piece because we did it during the middle of the year. But, you know, we have more schools and more high schools than we have people.
And Chief Ham's reference to the school police report card, we talked about that earlier this morning in operations, and
Right.
That's in the presentation. So if the commissioners want to look to that, but I think that that's another feedback tool, and we're incorporating that feedback into both implementation feedback, which I think the chief was referencing, but also if there are benefits for the policy. And similarly, I just wanted to call out also that Youth as Resources has been collaborating with Chief Ham around the citizen complaint form that came up this morning, and I think that's an important benefit. Doesn't surface to the policy or regulation necessarily, but it's important about the implementation of this. And then I really want to emphasize the important role that the Open Society, NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and others have played in working with the chief to codify the approach to diversion. So what you see here, there will obviously be more engagement, but what you see here is also a real product of important engagement already.
Are there other questions?
I'm not sure if our student commissioner has joined us yet, or if they'll be joining. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I was just about to check. Let me see the list. I don't think Ezra is here yet. Maybe still trying to get out of school or make their way home. Let's see. Yeah, I don't see them just yet. Okay. Great. So I will jump in. So I had a couple of, so there were just a couple of technical things that I saw. So I would just make a note of on the on the policy, what was the first one? It's that was just on page 1. It said him in terms of referencing a person who would be detained, and so just probably just some consistency things around, like students, all students, not him or her or things like that.
I'm smiling because we've been working really hard to have those gendered pronouns out of our policies and regulations. So you caught one we missed, but I think that yes, we will redouble our efforts to address.
Awesome. And so I think I was struck by 2 things, and would love to have some discussion about this. About one, it's a whole swath of policies and regulations, but then 2, it's very clear that sort of mental health supports were a core function of sort of the ways in which we know that are necessary resources to support young people, and in addition to the work that Chief Ham and the officers are doing. And so I'm just curious, one, about are we sort of engaging social workers and psychologists who are working in schools as community stakeholders to understand sort of some of the ways in which things are manifesting in public schools, in our schools? So that's one thing. But then 2, just general reflections, because again, I've been on this gripe with the district not allocating enough money to mental health support services, given that it's a part of an intervention for our schools, that it's part of what the school police officers do. I'm just curious on thoughts and reflections, either from Chief Ham, things that you've learned from social workers or folks like that, and then just a general gripe that I don't think we provide enough mental health support services for our students, given that it's a part of a core strategy of this work.
If I could interject, what I would say is that we do not take the lead, and I'm talking about school police, on any children in crisis or if they have a mental health issue. The only thing that we do is transport the children for related services. We don't assess, we don't get involved. If related services calls us, they ask us to transport the child for them, and then they deal with the whole process. We just take them there to the hospital. That's it. And even at night, there's conversation about Go Guardian. Well, at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's kind of hard to get somebody. We work 24 hours a day. So what we do at night, even when we get a suicidal ideation notification, we will go to the house and talk to the parent. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Davis, I think it may have been 2 or 3 times that we took kids to the hospital with the parent at the parent's request.
It was 3 times between August and mid-February. Right. It was you were called 29 times, and 3 of those times the parent requested transportation.
Right.
Great, thank you. And so I guess I'm curious then about sort of Chief Ham, like as officers, and I see that y'all do robust training, like are y'all engaging social workers, not necessarily in this capacity, but in terms of getting insights about how to sort of engage students who are actually in our schools?
Yes, we actually cross-functionally work with Dr. Brooks and her team with our young people, specifically when there's students with disabilities and students that have issues that we need to deal with. And I just want to be clear, there's a clear delineation of roles of us and what the staff is supposed to do. So my people know when to go to the administrator and turn something over to the administrator, and then whoever the administrator or the principal is will determine how we'll deal with the child.
Okay, so yes, so I get that. And I guess sort of what I was trying to get at is that like, how are you all receiving feedback from people who are doing direct service work, knowing that a part of the strategy that's laid out in this policy or a series of policies has sort of mental health as a core function of the strategy? And so maybe it's an Allison question or a Chief Davis question, if you all have just a sliver of that.
Right, and what I would say real quick before they chime in, we do have conversations routinely with YAR, Youth as Resources, the Algebra Project, and No Boundaries about, students with disabilities and mental health and all that kind of stuff. And they do offer suggestions and all that kind of stuff. So we do have those conversations. Now, Allison and Mr. Davis will probably have a bigger conversation than me, but I've met with youth-led organizations on how they feel about it.
Great, thank you for that.
John.
Feedback.
John's good. Yeah, go ahead, John. You start.
I was going to say, from a feedback standpoint, I do think there have been a number of times when Chief Ham has heard feedback around his officers. I know of one situation this year that caused him to make a specific change. And it's something that him and I talk about constantly if we're hearing anything based on the feedback from our youth-led groups. So I would say that we hear it a lot directly from folks. And I think our approach is always around wholeness. The training might come from different sources. It might come from the state. It might be something in the summer that all police officers are going through. So I think there is a wholeness approach to that. And I do think we've gotten feedback, especially from our key stakeholders, meaning our students.
Can you also talk, John, about the kind of other strategies to address the mental health needs of students that's outside of the school police work?
Sure. I mean, Commissioner Brooks, right? I fully support, the way that you pushed in this area. I know that this year we had a lot of funds set aside for social work, and it was very hard to find clinicians, no matter if we were working with our partners in our expanded school behavioral health model, or if we were trying to hire them within our own organization. And so one of the strategies we eventually started at the beginning of the year was around making sure that every school, and I think think we're close to 90% now, has a wellness team of their clinicians so that they're working really hard and sharing information about students that might be struggling.
Yeah, so Chief Davis, I hear that. I think sort of what I was talking about, so what I found to be striking though, was that there's this whole band of mental health recognition that of its priority in a sort of a broader public, like a public safety type of conversation. And then, so again, for me, the dissonance between sort of where we know we've needed support, and yet, so it sounds like if school police are part of a broader strategy for sort of protecting the peace, the fact that we don't have adequate mental health services mean that the public health strategy, the public safety strategy rather, within our school systems is then sort of weakened, and thereby sort of creating the conditions for our young people to be in spaces where there might be more threats than normal if we had adequate sort of roles and sort of we were actually staffed in the way that we needed to. So that's what I was trying to do that. Commissioner McFadden?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I've been hearing this thread often. I know that there is work being done to increase the amount of mental health staff members that City Schools has to actually implement a lot of the work that's been planned, in addition to teachers. So I know that it's been a challenge hiring in general, and I know that there's a push. Can someone just talk about the push to hire the staff, make sure that we actually have the human resources in place to implement not just this work, but all of the wholeness work, and then all of the instructional work that we're, planning to move forward with? Okay.
No, I mean, I think I think that what you're flagging is right, is that we need to figure out how, and we have been, to your point, Commissioner McFadden, very purposeful about trying to provide additional mental health services to our students and in our schools through the social workers that we've had, through the related services teams that John talked about, and trying to build relationships with students. We are continuing to do that and being strategic about adding as many of those wraparound services, as well as the behavioral mental health supports that we have partnerships with to provide in schools. So we have been very intentional about trying to do that, and we are continuing to do that. I think the relationship, there are key trainings and so on that are connected with school police in terms of the way they interact with students. So the de-escalation training, they do that in partnership with Deb Brooks's office to make sure that they're getting training in that. And so the ways that they interact with students, and some of the ways that Chief Ham talked about, the way that we train our officers, both in terms of that role clarity, in terms of what role they're playing and what role they're not playing, is partly how it connects to school police. But then I hear you, Commissioner Brooks, is that making sure that we have a full complement of the supports, mental health supports for our students too, so it's less likely to get to a school police. So I certainly wouldn't say it's perfect what we're doing, and we keep trying to add additional supports and making sure that we're working with partners to help fill some of the gaps, as we can't fill all the positions that we want to.
Yeah, thank you for that, Allison. Commissioner McFadden, did that answer your question?
I was just chiming in. Thank you, Allison.
Great.
If you're talking, Commissioner Brooks, we can't hear you.
I'm not sure if we've lost
Commissioner. Yeah, I was gonna say we might. I think we did lose him, maybe, but I still see him. Commissioner, if you can hear us, can you put something in the chat?
All right, so I just got cut out of the meeting, so sorry that we got disconnected. So unfortunately, my internet is not behaving today. And so there were a couple of other things that sort of were on my mind, specifically around the Miranda rights. And if someone could talk to me specifically about sort of, and I think Chief Sivan, you had mentioned this a little bit earlier, but sort of like, how is that process done differently for students who have developmental differences? If you know, like.
Right, there is a section, and it's a good point that you reference that talks particularly about making sure that we're taking into account students and where they're situated when we administer those rights, and so that's important. I know Chief Ham wants to chime in, but I think one of the other things that's important is that currently school police is engaging in very limited numbers of custodial interrogations. So I think that's important. And then the final point that I'll stress is that notification of parents and now consultation of with attorneys is going to be baked into the process in key ways to support all students, including students with disability. Chief Ham, what did I miss?
And what I would just piggyback on Josh with is that we only get involved in serious crimes. So with that being said, we turn that over to the police department. So we don't have any control over how we don't interrogate any kids. The police department does. And it's only for like robberies and rapes, sexual assaults, guns, stuff like that. And in certain cases, it depends on the age of the student. If they're minors, and when I say minors, I mean under 14, they can't even question. So if a kid, I'm just giving you an example. If a kid murders somebody and they're 15, we're not going to question the kid. The kid is going to be taken by the police somewhere and get talked to. We'll let their parents know, but we don't question.
Right, and now there'll be, I mean, whether it's school police or Baltimore City Police, there's that requirement of notifying parents. There's the requirement of also engaging and consulting with an attorney, and both in our policy, general order, and in the Baltimore City general orders, there are both specific general orders addressing individuals with disabilities, and then there's also particular language in this general order specifically focused on students with disabilities, also on students who may not have maybe English language learners, and so we need to be attuned to their ability to process what's being said as well.
Great, thank you for that. I'm sorry, Chief Ham, go ahead.
I was telling Josh exactly. I agree with what he said, but I just think it needs to be clear that we're not interrogating anybody for anything. If it's not something that happens in front of the police officer and it's a serious crime, we call in the police department. We don't question kids about now. Whatever the principal wants to do is on the principal, but we don't. And I think that's important to be said because I think some people just don't know. Like, we're not questioning any children.
Great, thank you for that. I also was notified that our student commissioner has arrived as well. Ezra, just wanted to give you an opportunity to sort of weigh in if you had any questions about the policy. Oh, Ezra, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
I do know Ezra let me know that they were having some issues with internet, but let me see. if I see the phone number.
Okay. So Commissioner McFadden, did you have any other questions?
No, I don't. I know we have folks signed up for public comment.
Yes, yeah. So I'm not finished. I have a few more questions. So I just wanted to see if you had any or Ezra had any before we went to public comment. Awesome. Christian, if you could let me know when Ezra gets on, just want to give them an opportunity to speak.
Yep, I just texted them, so I'm just waiting to hear back.
Awesome. And so I do have a question about sort of like the compliance component of this. So oftentimes in the data that we see is a reduction in sort of the engagements of the transportation of the arrest of young people and so forth in city schools. But I'm interested, like, are there other data markers that we think that are important to collect, like the number of encounters? So I don't know if a call automatically translates into an encounter that is reportable, the number of trainings hours completed, the folks who are in compliance or out of compliance for any number of reasons. So I'm interested to figure out, like, a part of the work that we've been trying to do is to make sure that our compliance reports are actually usable for us. And so I would be interested to hear, like, are there other data points that you all are already collecting that we should be rolled up to the board in terms of a compliance report?
All right, so to your first point, in terms of collection of data, we do collect arrest data. We work with Mr. Davis's team in related services to aggregate whether they were black, white, mental health or not, and all that kind of stuff. We look at that. And we're starting to do it with diversions now. How many people we divert, the race, the color, the gender, and all that kind of stuff. So we're doing that now with the diversions, since we have more diversions than we do arrests. We're looking at that. And your second question was what?
It was trying to figure out, like, are there, a part of this has been trying to get our compliance reports to be useful for the board. Like, so what other data markers? So it sounds like you're collecting some, but I'm curious if there are other ones that we feel might be also useful that you're already collecting to have some conversation about.
And Chief, if I could just put an exclamation point on Chief Ham's point about diversion data. So I think that's a real upgrade that, I mean, it's already in the compliance report listing, but if you look at the general order around diversions and the language there about tracking diversions, our hope is that we'll have much more additional data through this process. I also want to call out that in this compliance report as exists, the report that we actually did this morning around the school police report card, the engagement with the student advisory team, there are a number of pieces here where Chief Ham and his team do a lot of work that yields data that then is folded into assessments of compliance and fidelity with this policy.
Great, thank you, Josh. So maybe it is, maybe I need to go revisit that compliance report, because I was trying to figure out, like, was there a one, because I don't think I've seen that one, but we can sort of try to get a sort of the compliance report of this. I would love to see it.
Some of it is state mandated that we have to send in to MSDE. Not all, but the arrests we do.
Great.
And it has to be, you have to say black male, white male, Hispanic, or girl, and IEP 504, what they did and all that. We have to send that to the state every year.
Yeah, and so Chief Sivan, are you aware, like, because I don't, for the life of me, I can't remember sort of the compliance report for this portion, is there already something that's already put together that I could actually just see in terms of like what data points we're actually collecting and so forth? That comes to
Sure.
the board?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we can forward you the latest compliance report summary, and then also I think the presentation this morning will be helpful on that count as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And the other thing we have to keep in mind is that we're under a pandemic. So if we're not talking about this year, we have to go 2 years back because the kids weren't in school, so we didn't have any interaction.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Christian, I see your hand.
Yes, just also another way, just as the board office, we do upload the compliance reports to the library section. So you can also look at them there. They're just up, it's under library compliance reports, and they're organized by policy. And all of the public ones from this year we've uploaded, and you should have some of the previous ones in the administrative section.
Sweet, thank you. I'll take a look at that. So I just don't remember what data points we're collecting. Awesome. Ezra, are you available? Are you online?
Like I said, Ezra told me she was having internet issues, so that's probably why.
Okay, sweet. So I don't have any more questions. I'm looking forward to hearing, sort of, as Commissioner McFadden said earlier, some of the feedback from stakeholders, and it sounds like you already have some. So I'm sure that hopefully the other information will be really helpful and useful as well. And so thank you all so much. Thank you, Chief Ham, for coming in. I know you're busy moving about from space to space. And thank you, Chief Davis and Chief Sivan, for all of the work and pulling through all of the policies specifically that we've just updated and sort of incorporating them into all of these other pieces. So I kept seeing all of the red lines of the thing, so it was great. And so,
I think because I'm in the middle of trying to get this young man that killed this young boy from Carver after the prom, and I've been working with the police department to try to get this guy that killed this kid. So that's what I'm working on now.
Oh wow, yeah. So thank you for that work, Chief Ham.
Yes, sir.
Great. So we'll move into sort of public comment then. We'll have our first person, and please forgive me if I pronounce your name incorrectly. It's Priya Bayana.
It's Priya. Last name was right. Priya Bayana.
Priya. So thank you, Priya. And you'll have, I believe, what is it, 5 minutes, Christian, in this space?
3 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Priya. Thank you all for your work and just the opportunity to comment here. So for context, I'm the Program Development Manager at the Restorative Justice Organization, RRB, Restorative Response Baltimore, and I'm also a member of the Baltimore School Diversion Strategies Roundtable that drafted the policy. And I just have some clarifying questions about some of the changes that we noticed and also about actual implementation. So the first one is around the verbiage, just general order versus policy, how those two labels differ in terms of implementation and how they're put into practice. Also had a question about providing more information about how decisions about which providers to refer incidents to, how those decisions are made, and what the relationship between and communication between referral providers and the school police and city schools would be, what that would look like. Right now, as one of those providers, we don't really have a relationship. So I'm curious to know how that will look. Also curious to hear more about the evaluation of the program, like who would be involved in evaluating it, particularly interested in like student and family involvement. How will public accountability and communication be ensured around this diversion strategy? Also want to know more about the education, training, and implementation, not just for school police and school administration, but also teachers, students, students as those who are, most impacted by this. How are students and parents and families being communicated to about this general order, and ensuring that there's transparency around the process and that students and families know what to expect. And then lastly, a question about the diversion assessor. In the original draft we had written that the assessors would be housed in city schools, particular expertise related to positive youth development and intervention. And I just wanted to clarify, because it looks like in the edit that person is going to be staffed by the school police force. So yeah, hoping to get some clarification on that. And that is all I've got. Thank you.
Great, thank you. A lot of questions. Did you have a chance to share those questions with our Executive Officer, Christian Gant, so that we can make sure that we get full responses to all of them?
I did not, but I will do that.
Awesome, thank you. Great, and was there anyone, because there were a lot of questions, wanted to provide any context on the policy or the questions that were asked?
This is Josh Sivan. I can provide a little bit. First of all, thanks. I wanted to clarify, we're talking about the diversion general order, and thanks to the many who have already given ideas really to codify what we're already working on and doing. There is, and I think this is important, there is language about diversion, additional language about diversion, both in the administrative regulations, so that's ECAE-RA, as well as in the general order. And so we want the general order to be the details as we follow in school police, and the policy and regulation to set up the overall standards. But I think the general orders are also adopted by the board, so they operate over the school system as well. And we will definitely look in detail about feedback and clarification about the referral process, about the information and evaluation. And I think we are open to comments and feedback about the diversion assessors themselves. I believe the language, and we can look at the detail, is that the chief of schools designates those people so that they do not at all have to be in the school police. But given our staffing and our configuration, we thought that this would more generally sit in the school's office as part of our program, just like our student code of conduct sits in our school office, our wholeness folks sit in our school's office. So there's a broad gamut of our team that sits in the school's office. And then welcome follow-up on the specific questions.
And I think it's important to be said that we look at every diversion program that we have available. But the other thing is, some of the programs, depending on how many times the child has been in trouble, they won't accept them. So we have to send them to another program or another program. And I just think we just need to keep that in mind. If they have several handgun violations in their child or sex offenses and all that, some of them won't take them. So we have to shop around to get them. I'm just saying, just keep it in mind. They have criteria. I'm just letting you know.
Yeah, and I think sort of, Chief Ham, I think that raises a great point. It's sort of when I get to sort of dig into the compliance report, the data that we're collecting, I think when we're thinking about diversions and the number and the ways in which our young people might have particular experiences and that are attached to their histories, and as you just laid out, like, do we have the right people in places in the right organizations to actually even accomplish the thing? And so I think for me, this is where data becomes really, really important driver for decision making. And because I think if we notice a pattern, then we might be having conversations with different practitioners or diversion programs, for example.
And I totally agree with you in what we're doing. We have someone that works for Lori Hines, who's in charge of suspensions that deal with conflict resolution. And I don't know if everybody knows on the call, but even if we arrest a child, it could take 60 to 90 days before it goes to court, even if it goes to court. So she deals with that immediately. If we can't find a resolution through diversion, she meets with the families and all that kind of stuff immediately so that we can quell whatever the situation is. I'm just saying, I don't know everybody that's on the phone, but that's a lot quicker than 60 to 90 days. And then the parents get upset and now they're at the school in the car jumping out and ready to fight. And we can get it dealt with immediately. So that's happening right now.
Great, thank you for that context, Chief Ham. And so we will invite Esther Joy to sort of ask some, you'll have 3 minutes to ask some questions for us as well.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Esther Mungai. I'm a senior community organizer with the Legal Defense Fund, and also a member of the Diversion Roundtable that was mentioned earlier that helped draft the original policy along with OSF, RRB, referred to Baltimore, YAR, Youth as Resources, several other organizations and groups that I won't get to name all of them right now. So appreciate this opportunity to come back to this policy and talk more about what our original intent was and the impact that we want this to have. And so as Priya already mentioned, we did have some questions about some of the changes that we saw, primarily the change from a policy to a general order. I definitely understand that we are codifying many of the practices that the school police have under Chief Ham put in place and that we want to exist, 10, 20, 30 years from now. But as I was listening to the conversation, I also want to bring up that, others raise things that this is not just on school police. This is upon the school district as a whole to implement all of the things from interactions with the criminal legal system and, feed into that school to prison pipeline. And so while we recognize the need for codifying what the school police are doing, I'm curious as to whether there's a consideration now that this is a general order for school police of having a similar policy that will apply for the school district as a whole, since we know that the staff, the teachers, the administrators are going to be critical in making sure that it is actually carried out and executed in reducing and eliminating contact with the criminal legal system and restoring and resolving the conflicts that exist in schools currently or in the future between students, families, and others that are involved. On that, as Priya mentioned, we also had questions about the implementation, but more specifically around that, there is a lot that has to happen once any policy is passed to ensure that the public is educated about it, particularly parents. During the course of the diversion roundtable meetings, and Chief Ham can speak to this, a lot of the concerns about diversions was that in particular cases, for example, theft of cell phones, a lot of parents would bypass the diversion process because things, property that's stolen, that's worth hundreds of dollars, potentially more, is very difficult for folks to not want to, seek legal recourse for that versus follow the process, resolving that conflict and actually more often than not getting the property returned to them. And so we just really want to make sure for the implementation piece, seeing a beefing up of that to make sure that it's not just that school police are going to be responsible for holding this container, but that the entire school district is bought into the process. So I'll pause there. I know that I'm at time, but we also are looking forward to continuing to follow up with the school district about our additional questions and comments to hopefully continue to refine and improve this before it goes up for first reader this August, I believe you all mentioned.
Great, thank you so much for sort of the commentary and sort of the questions and so forth. And I do think that there is, one of the things that I think that we've been trying to do is to really, make sure that we have really sound, strong policy, knowing that the implementation piece is often where it gets tricky. And so, so we stay in this board governance space, and then it's usually through the compliance reports that we actually get to figure out, what's actually happening and whether or not it's effective. And I think the continued pressure to be placed on like having effective implementation will both come, at least on my side, I can speak for myself, but then also hopefully community partners are continuing to press for an effective implementation of this that is systemic and that we get quality data back so we can make decisions that are based on the best interests of our young people and our families and to ensure the safety of our schools. So, so thank you so much for that. And were there any other sort of reflections or responses to the questions that were, or the commentary that were laid out? Great. And so if there are no more sort of questions from our commissioners, did you want to have any sort of, did you have any closing reflections or anything you wanted to share, Commissioner McFadden or our student commissioner, Ezra?
Not in particular, but thank you to the members of our community who have come this afternoon to attend our meeting. I appreciate your advocacy and your partnership. So thank you.
Thank you for that. And so with that, I will sort of first thank all of the presenters again for coming to give us an update. And I believe this process of getting our feedback early and sort of engaging this committee and in a spirited discussion is always welcomed. And I think our policies will be better for it. Also, I want to thank sort of Christian and Tanisha. I did not see you earlier, so I wanted to say thank you again for all that you do to support us.
Thank you.
For sure. And with that said, I will adjourn this meeting at 4:42. Our next meeting will be June 21st. It'll be virtual from 3:30 to 5:30, and we'll be exploring EHB data retention policy. And if folks want to sort of sign up for a public comment, you can do so at 9 a.m. the Thursday before our public meeting and up until 5 p.m. the Monday before the meeting date. You can contact our board office. And with that, thank you all so much. And we look forward to seeing you here again at our policy committee in June. Thank you all so much.